Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video. And today is kind of a sequel to a ranking video I just recently made. It's part 2, if you will, part 2 of my Need for Speed ranking videos. So today's video is going to be Need for Speed games released in the 2000s. Part 1 was all the classic games from the 90s. Here we have all of the Need for Speed games released during the 2000s. Now the 2000s were the most popular time Need for Speed has ever been. Now, Need for Speed has always been popular, but thanks to outside car culture and a certain movie called Fast and Furious, Need for Speed really just kind of exploded in the 2000s, and it was one of EA's most successful game series ever. And a lot of people really look fondly back on a lot of these games from the 2000s. While the first couple Need for Speeds were all about driving fancy exotic cars through like mountains and highways and going across the beach and occasionally getting into a cop chase, the Need for Speed games in the 2000s are very different. Most of them are open world with an incredible amount of car customization, the car selection being completely different, the cops still being involved, but the vibe and atmosphere just being so far removed from those original games that you'd barely know it was even the same series, honestly. And you know, a lot of these games actually are really different from each other. You'll actually see a decent amount of variety released in the 2000s. There was a lot of Need for Speed games released in the 2000s also, but we're going to be looking at just the home console / PC version of these games. I am aware that there are some handheld versions of these games, but I have not tried them, and maybe one day I'll rank all the handheld Need for Speed games. I don't know, but today we're just looking at what most people probably remember, the home console versions of these games. And we're going to be ranking these worst to best. We're going to be looking at pretty much everything here. How have the games aged? How are the graphics? How's the soundtrack? Are the AI crazy, cheating? How's the handling, the physics, etc.? Now, I know a lot of people have a ton of memories and nostalgia for these games, but I'm going to be honest with you, I've never played any of these games except for Hot Pursuit 2 until I made this video, where I sat down, I bought all of them, and I sat down and played all of them. All I gotta say is my mind is Need for Speeded out. I played all these games over the course of like 3 months. Also, let me know your favorites down below, or if you disagree with my hot takes. As always, let me know. Like, share, comment, sub, all that good stuff. Let's just get right to it. What is the weakest Need for Speed in the 2000s, in my opinion? And so sadly, here we have Need for Speed Pro Street, released in 2007, developed by EA's Black Box. So Pro Street is very different actually from most of the Need for Speed games here in the 2000s. The game came out after Underground, Most Wanted, and Carbon, but instead of it being on the streets with an open world, it now takes place on racetracks, airports, and really just not the streets. It's all legally done here, you see. The story sees you playing as Ryan Cooper, lamest name like ever by the way, and wants to beat Rio and wants to become the best at this tournament, festival, whatever it is. Simple enough, it's not even anywhere near as complex as the last couple of games. I mean, it's fine, it's whatever, the premise is fine enough. The atmosphere and vibes here though are completely different from the other Need for Speed games. Like I said, it's more of a festival. It's something that Forza Horizon would do more recently, and I'll just say I think those games handle it a lot better than this game when it comes to aesthetics and vibes. But you know, it's still alright here. The games, it does have a decent combo of sometimes illegal but mostly legal racing to create a decently unique setting from the rest of the series. However, the gameplay is a completely different story for me. I'm not too sure what exactly it was, but I just had a hard time getting into this game even until like the very end. The handling and physics just never clicked with me. This game is very simcade and it doesn't fully commit to either, and while I don't think that suits Need for Speed all that well, I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm willing to try something different, but this game just never really stuck with me. I think they should have just committed to more of a sim if that's what they were going for, more of an arcade game. Really, I think they should have just committed more to a sim if that's what they were going for with this level of realism. The game felt either super sluggish or too fast. The turning and general physics just felt really questionable a lot of the time. In combination with the braking, didn't lead to a good feel at all for me. I just never really had any fun with it, and I like sims. Forza, Gran Turismo, and even Shift are great. Like, this game just didn't do it for me when it comes to the controls. It was my biggest issue with it immediately. The cars take damage and you'll have to repair them, and that can affect your performance, and I just didn't like this. I thought it was annoying, and it didn't really add anything to the game, and I don't think it belongs in a game like this either, but that's just me. The tracks didn't do it for me either. I get they're going to be a little different from the other games and not all that exciting since a lot of them are real, but I just thought they were relatively dull, and they got really dull really fast when you had to drive on them so many times, especially at the beginning where it's the same couple tracks over and over. The game doesn't have a ton of tracks to it. Now, Need for Speed and repetitive usually go together, but this one was like repetitive almost immediately thanks to how many of the tracks you repeat. There's a number of different events here though. There's drag racing, which is pretty prominent here. You burn rubber before the race, and I mean, this is a fine enough idea since it's realistic. I just didn't think it was that fun. The actual drag racing, I mean, it was alright. Personally, I liked how Most Wanted and Underground did it, though. The drifting events I thought were just awful, and I never got a good handle on these, and really the general physics-based racing just wasn't for me. While the presentation was questionable with a bad frame rate and suspicious textures, I liked the game's style, its vibe, its music I thought were all really good, and there's some good ideas here. This game was just ultimately not for me, and it's not because I want it like the other Need for Speeds. It needs to be arcade and racy and stuff. No, I could tell they were going for something different here, and it just doesn't gel with me. This game seems to be one of the more divisive games in the series. A lot of people say it's underrated, and people didn't like it just because it was different from Underground. And you know, I went into this game with a fresh perspective. I really did try to like it, but it just really didn't sit with me, and sadly, I'm in the camp of disliking this game. It just wasn't for me, but hey, if you love it, you love it, but me personally, I'm good. Alright, so here we have Need for Speed Undercover, released in 2008 and developed by EA Black Box. So Undercover really kind of responds to a lot of the criticisms that Pro Street had, that it was different from the Need for Speed games of the earlier 2000s, and it really tries to go back to some of the stuff that made Need for Speed crazy popular to begin with, an open world, police chases, and cool cars. So Undercover takes place in another big open city. Like the title implies, you are undercover. You're an undercover cop, and you're working to basically get a bunch of these illegal drivers behind bars through joining their ranks, gaining their trust, and then taking them out, and not on the date variety, if you couldn't tell. The story in this game is aggressively bad. It is ridiculous how bad it is. Now, Need for Speed and good stories just don't go together outside of maybe like The Run. I just don't think Need for Speed has ever had a very good story, any of the games. But this goes from like corny, cheesy, kind of enduring bad that say Most Wanted would have, to just really that awful. Like, this really is just awful. It's contrived, it's been done before, it's predictable, and ultimately it's just boring, and I really wanted to skip these cutscenes and I can't. Oh, and the acting is just terrible also. Okay, awful story aside, let's talk about how the game plays. Now, when it comes to this game's handling and the feel and the physics, it's really okay to mediocre. This game's handling, like, at best is alright. It feels very loose and it's a little sensitive at times, but it can really be unpredictable when it comes to its physics. Like, the physics can just be really wonky in this game, and just the cars will do stuff that you would not expect them to do, and it's also a bit inconsistent with itself when it comes to them. But when it comes to the actual progression, it's much more like Most Wanted and Carbon. You're in a big open city where you can explore to your heart's content. You can get into police chases, or you can just do the events. I'll be the first to say I think this city is one of the most dull open worlds that the series has ever seen. It just feels so bland and generic, and it feels like we've been through this city numerous times before in other Need for Speed games. It doesn't really have anything that stands out from it. But you can totally ignore the open world and just go event from event. These events are what you've seen before in a Need for Speed game. A lot of them are just basic races, sometimes a one-on-one, or it's a cop chaser where you have to do so much destruction. Now, all the events in this game, they've all been done before in other Need for Speed games. You really do get a been there, done that feeling from this, because there's just nothing new when it comes to the events or how any of these play out, and they've been done better in other games. Customization, like Pro Street, I feel is just very lackluster, and we'll just never get back to Underground 2 and Most Wanted's excellent customization. Now, like the open world, I thought playing through this game was just a relatively dull experience. It just didn't do really anything to excite me. I thought all the races were just pretty meh to bland, and you play through seemingly the same couple areas over and over and over, and I'm sure you did that in the other Need for Speed games, but it didn't feel that way, at least not immediately. This game feels far more repetitive, way faster than other games, because yeah, you're seemingly on the same route over and over. And the police chases are just incredibly lackluster. Sure, they can just spawn out of the literal walls and anywhere, but they just don't put up like any challenge. They don't ever even try to really take you out. They're just boring. You know what's actually way better at taking you out? The traffic in this game. The traffic is bad. It is underground levels of bad. Like, the cars literally spawn out of nothing. They will aim for you. They will try to drive into you, and it honestly got me pretty frustrated seeing these dumbass traffic cars just smashing into me on purpose. And in the end, I just wanted this game to end, which is never a good sign. I don't recommend it, and I just didn't have a good time with it. And in the end, I just didn't have a good time with Undercover. I thought the presentation was also very lacking, and I just wouldn't recommend this game. And so here we have Need for Speed Nitro, developed for the Wii by EA Montreal. This is a very different game from all the other Need for Speed games. This is easily the most arcade, crazy racing game that the series has ever seen. This plays a lot more like some of the later cruising games than a Need for Speed game. And you can tell from this game's vibe, its aesthetic, and its approach to cars in general. A lot of the game features disproportionate real-life vehicles, and it just allows them to go absolutely nuts on these tracks. And you know, I'm all for it. I'm all for them doing something different, and I love cruising, and so this seemed right up my alley. After playing this game for a bit, yeah, it's pretty okay. I wouldn't say it's anywhere near as good as some of the later cruising games, but I don't think it's as bad as this game's reputation makes it out to be. I've heard some people call this the worst of the Need for Speed games, and I really just kind of question that. When it comes to actually playing this game, it obviously is a bit different. You go much faster, and there's a really big emphasis on like drifting and boosting. There's circuits, team circuits, elimination races, drift challenges, speed trap challenges, drag racing, and time attacks. There's a bunch of different events here. Some of them are different, and they all do play different from other Need for Speed games. During these races, police will attempt to block and ram into you, and they'll actually try to, you know, take you out. And you'll just be boosting as fast as you can, trying to get through these tracks as fast as you can. There's not a ton of tracks here. There is a little bit of variety at least, but I didn't feel it got as repetitive immediately as, say, Undercover. But yeah, I actually thought that this game is pretty fun. The handling and the physics are just completely crazy and don't even try to be realistic, and I think that's to the game's betterment. Just let it go wild. And it's on the Wii, but you don't actually have to steer like a car, like for Mario Kart Wii or something like Mario Kart Wii. You can just plug in a GameCube controller and just use a regular ass controller to play this game, so that's nice. I think the game actually is decently fun. It has different modes, it has some variety. The handling, like I said, is fine enough. It's not great, it does get old and it does get repetitive kind of quickly, but you know, it ends before it gets too repetitive. Look, it's not exactly the deepest gameplay. I will say it does get a bit shallow and it can get stale by the end of it, but I still, yeah, it's a fine enough arcade racer. Still though, if it comes to this or cruising, I mean, it's better than cruising on Wii, but cruising like Blast, oh, much better game than this. Alright, and so here we got Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, released in 2000 for the computer and the PS1, developed by Eden Games on the PS1 and EA Canada on the PC. I initially was going to try the PS1 version until I saw how different and worse of a game it was compared to the PC version, so we're looking at the PC version. Now, Porsche Unleashed is very different from all the other Need for Speed games, specifically because it only has Porsche cars from the 50s all the way to 2000. There's no other type of car here, and you know, Porsches, they're pretty cool, I will say that. Now, this game is a classic Need for Speed racing game through and through. There's no really extra modes here. There are police, but they don't really chase you down. They're nowhere near as serious as, say, Hot Pursuit or anything like that. And it's all about racing exotic cars throughout Europe. There's two modes here. There's Evolution mode, where you start with the OG Porsches and you go all the way to 2000, and yeah, you're just racing. And then there's also Factory Driver mode, where you go through a series of events like stunts and some more exotic races. It's actually pretty cool stuff here. The campaign is very unique from other Need for Speed games, even other classic Need for Speed games, and not just because of the Porsches, but the tracks are fun. The handling is a bit different from the super arcadey games. It actually is a little bit more realistic. And the game actually has a very good attention to detail, especially for the time. When it comes to the cars, like, for the time, these were like the best looking Porsches in any video game. Obviously nowadays it doesn't look anywhere near as good, but I will just say for the time it really did have a very good attention to detail. The actual tracks are nothing special, but they're fine enough, and racing on them is a fun time. I think the events are a decent mix up here as well. I think Porsche Unleashed is pretty fun. It's a pretty decent racing game. I've heard some people call it a bit underrated over the years, and yeah, it's probably one of the more forgotten Need for Speed games, especially because the PS1 version just is so bad, so you gotta like do some configuring to get this game to work on a modern computer, but it's probably worth it. I mean, if you like Porsche cars, if you like classic Need for Speed, yeah, check it out. It could be a hell of a lot worse, I'll say that. And so here we have Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 releasing in 2002, and I played the GameCube version until I got some friendly reminders to play the PS2 version instead. And that's the first thing I'm going to bring up. If you're even going to talk about Hot Pursuit 2, you want to be trying the PS2 version, as it is much better than the GameCube version, which is the version I got as a kid, and that's the version I played all the way up until 2022, only to find out the PS2 version is way better. The GameCube version has a whole host of issues, like bad handling, crummy progression, a bit repetitive, and subpar graphics, but, you know, the PS2 version, ooh, this is the version to play. If it was just the GameCube version, this would be even lower on the list. So, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2. It is obviously a sequel to Hot Pursuit, which was the first Need for Speed to introduce the police, and in my opinion, the best of the Need for Speed classic games. There's no real story here, and it was actually the first Need for Speed to have licensed music, and I'll just say the music is pretty great in this game. That opening is real good too. Now on the GameCube and Xbox and PC version, there's a career mode. There's two trees, one for just pure racing and one where you're avoiding the cops or you're the cops and taking people out. But the PS2 version instead is a point system where you go down two trees basically. And as you go through the tree, you get points to buy cars as opposed to just kind of being given a car or a selection of cars like the GameCube version. Now, when it comes to the handling, the GameCube version, the handling sucks in this game. The cars feel incredibly floaty, they oversteer like a sim, but are also arcade with the speed and acceleration and really just the general feel. The hit detection is really poor and you clip through stuff and you won't even be near stuff and you'll just like get stuck on it. It's frustrating. The PS2 version though, it controls much better. It's much more arcade. The hit detection is better. You don't clip on stuff. Yeah, it's not even close. The PS2 version controls better and it feels a lot better. When it comes to the tracks, it's pretty much the same throughout both of them. The PS2 version, though, does have a few extra ones. They're all relatively straight. There's some cool shortcuts here and there. Nothing too crazy, nothing too special, but I thought the tracks were fine enough here. But you want to know about the police. Yeah, you get to play as the police here. You get to actually take people out and you're the cop mode, and you know, this is fun. This is different. Now, while I think the championship, the racing part of it is actually pretty decent to good, how are the police chases? The police chases in this game are not messing around, regardless of the version you're playing. But in the PS2 version, they are really not messing around. So the police will do everything in their power to take you out. They will try to ram you, they will try to stop you with barricades, spike strips, and in the PS2 version, they even get a helicopter and shoot like missiles at you. It is just ridiculous. The police chases are some of the craziest police chases in the entire series. It can be actually really exhilarating and it is really fun. I think that the police chases are just as good as the racing in this game. I think this game actually holds up pretty decently well. It doesn't feel all that bad, especially on the PS2. The races are engaging, the police chases are good, the soundtrack is good. Yeah, this is a pretty good time all around. Just again, stay away from that GameCube version. That was the version that I started with, and this game was about to be in like one of the worst Need for Speed games until I played the PS2 version. Was like, wow, this is actually really good. Alright, and here we have one of the best-selling games in the Need for Speed series, Need for Speed Underground, developed by EA Black Box and released in 2003. Need for Speed Underground just kind of blew the lid off of what people expected from a Need for Speed game. Inspired by a certain movie that may be called Fast and Furious, it was all about that underground feel. The story, if you can even call it that, was about you just rising to the top. The vibes were totally different from this game from any other Need for Speed game before it, with it being all about that, like I said, underground scene, that imported streetcar racing scene. It's the Ricer Gang. The whole game takes place at night. It's all about the dark city with the bright lights. It's definitely a mood. It is absolutely a mood. Now, I'm sure I'm going to bother some people with where I have this game placed, but you know, I've never played this game before. This is not a game I grew up with. This was my first time playing it, and coming back all these years later, this game has aged. It kind of reminds me of when I finally played GoldenEye, where I was like, man, so many people like absolutely love this, but coming back to it all these years later without nostalgia, it's still good, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it holds up as well as some people might remember. But you know, let's get down to brass tacks. What's the actual gameplay like? Well, you're dropped into this career mode and you got like 100 missions to do and a hell of a lot of racing. When it comes to the actual driving, I think it's fine enough. It's aged a bit, but you know, it's decent. It still handles pretty alright. But it has some issues. The handling can be incredibly unpredictable in this game, especially whenever you go airborne. I really did not like going airborne in this game because you just don't know how the car is going to react. You can think you know how the car is going to react, but you just don't know. Something that people absolutely loved about this game was its customization. The car customization is fantastic in this game. You can customize like every part of these cars. It is very cool. It was not only incredibly impressive for the time, but it's actually even impressive nowadays with how much customization you can put on these cars and making your car really look swagged out. I mean, eventually it does get a bit silly with how much junk you basically put on it, but you can make some crazy looking cars. Now, when it comes to the tracks are actually pretty well designed. The whole game takes place in this city, and the whole city does feel interconnected, which is a cool feeling. However, the game does reuse a lot of the same tracks. There's seriously like maybe a dozen or so, and across 100 missions, you're going to be replaying a lot of these tracks a lot of the time, just from the amount of missions. However, on top of that, you're going to be replaying these missions a lot because of a couple reasons. Now, I didn't realize it because I had never played the game, and it wasn't until I got to about the halfway point in this game, but this game just becomes crushingly difficult and incredibly frustrating. Now, rubber banding and Need for Speed, like I've said, they kind of go together. Usually there's some level of rubber banding in these games, but the rubber banding in Underground is just ridiculous. These cars can always keep up with you, or they're always faster than you. It just gets absurd. You can have a near perfect run and you'll barely beat the competition by seconds, and they will have crashed numerous times. They just always seem to catch up to you. And so with that in mind, any little mistake you make, especially on like the last lap, you might as well just restart because you're not going to win. You're just not going to catch them. My biggest issue with driving in the city is the traffic. The traffic in this game is just so bad. It is ridiculously frustrating how bad the traffic is in this game. It pissed me the hell off. They love to spawn cars in the worst possible areas where you either have little to no time to react or you just had no chance of avoiding it. It just loves to get in the way, especially at the end of a 7 to 10 minute race. It is just ridiculous and is maddening as hell. Like, I just wasted like 10 minutes on this race and I have to do it all over because of some stupid car that showed up at the last moment. Mission 95 in this game. Mission 95 was really my breaking point. It was when I put the game on easy. It was when I sat down and really focused, and it took me well over an hour to beat this stupid fucking mission. This mission really just tore me up. Now, I'm not the best at this game, I'm the first to admit it, so call it a skill issue or whatever, but this mission was just awful, and I hated replaying it over and over, and I just got sick of these tracks. You do them in reverse, too, so seriously, you'll know these tracks like the back of your hand. I can still remember them even now. And really, the last third of Need for Speed Underground, I think, is just borderline miserable. Like, if you're going to play this game nowadays, I would say just stop once you get to the last third. It just gets ridiculous, where literally one mistake will ruin your entire run and you got to start the whole race over. And some of these races, like I've mentioned, are like 7 to 10 minutes long. It just gets ridiculous. And all of that is why I have Need for Speed Underground where it is. I was so mad playing it. But I'll end on a high note. This game's soundtrack. The soundtrack is fantastic in this game. The music is so good. Like, wow, is this music great. I love the music, and I also love the aesthetic. Should you play Need for Speed Underground nowadays? I think it's still worth playing, but again, that last third of the game, just stop. Just stop while you're ahead. Don't even bother. Alright, so here we got Need for Speed Shift, developed by Slightly Mad Studios and released in 2009. Now, Need for Speed Shift was very different from most Need for Speed games ever released. It was a lot more of a simcade title, and EA was really trying to capitalize on the Gran Turismo and Forza hype, it seems. Now, if you remember, Pro Street kind of was a simcade also, and I really disliked Pro Street, but this game, I actually really like Need for Speed Shift, and I think it's what Pro Street should have been. Now, there's no story or really premise or anything like that here, so let's just get into what I thought was the biggest issue with Pro Street, which was the handling and the controls. I don't have really any issues with the handling or controls here at all, actually. The controls are great. This game really captures the idea of a simcade, where you can have it super simulator, like you can have it really realistic, and not as realistic as probably Gran Turismo, but decently realistic, or you can make it pretty arcade, where it's not even all that far off from the main Need for Speed games. I of course chose the latter of those options, but I really liked this game's handling and physics being very customizable. You can have a lot of the assists on or off. I thought the controls are actually really good, especially considering how many options there were, and I just walked away feeling satisfied with the driving and handling here. Something that this game has that I'll immediately give some props to is this game actually has a really good attention to detail. This game does not have anywhere near as many cars as say Gran Turismo or Forza. No, it doesn't, but what it makes up for is it has a very high amount of detail, especially from the interior view. There really is a decent amount of detail here, and it's recognizable even nowadays. When it comes to the presentation, I think it's really swell. I think it's all really solid. I wish the music could have been a little better, but it is what it is. When it comes to the tracks, it's mostly real life tracks here. I'm pretty sure almost all of it is real life tracks, and so I'm pretty used to some of these from like Gran Turismo, but I mean, it's still fun enough to go around racing on them. I wish there was a little more tracks, to be honest. I wish there was some more variety, maybe some made up ones. It didn't have to be all this real stuff. Now, another thing I really like about Shift is that the game rewards you for every type of play. It doesn't force you into a simulator play style, and you really can play this game like how you played other Need for Speeds, and the game will reward you. For instance, if you play it clean, you don't hit stuff, you don't hit other cars, and you drift around corners just fine, like the game's gonna reward you. It's gonna reward you with points, money, etc. If you play this game like you played the other Need for Speeds, where you're smashing into the other cars like they're the police, you're cutting corners just a little bit, and you're really just driving low-key recklessly, the game will also give you points, money, etc. for that as well. And that's a difference from, say, Gran Turismo that I think is actually really good, and it gives this game a bit more of a personality versus those games. Now, when it comes to things I didn't like about this game, I thought the customization was super weak in this game, just no incentive, and then it just wasn't even very good to begin with. I did get a little bored of the real-life tracks because, again, I played a lot of them in, say, Gran Turismo, and it can lead to the game feeling a bit repetitive, which is a shame because it's only like 8 or 9 hours long, like max. But you know, despite all that, I think you have a very solid Simcade title here. It's not going to beat your Forzas, it's not going to beat your GTs, but I think you have a more than confident, fun racing game here, which is really what matters at the end of the day, and I think that the game is still worth playing. It's pretty cheap, it's on Xbox and PS3, and somehow if you can find a CD key on PC, I guess. And for being the last Need for Speed game of the 2000s, I think they ended it on a high note. This was one of the better ones.
And so here we have Need for Speed Carbon releasing in 2006. It had the unenviable task of following up on Most Wanted, and it takes place literally right after Most Wanted. It takes place in the fictional city of Palmont City, and takes place really just right after the ending of Most Wanted, and sees our unnamed protagonist returning to the city and basically trying to take the city over from various street racing gangs. He's got a bit of a past, and also the cop from the last game is still on his ass. The story in this game is pretty silly, it's kind of stupid, but it's honestly just about as charming as Most Wanted. It's like, you're not here for an excellent story, you're not even here for anything good, but what's here, I actually think it's pretty alright. The cutscenes, yes, some of them are pretty cringe, but it's not anywhere near as bad as, say, Undercover, and I think it does have a certain cheesiness to it. I'm not going to say the writing or the characters are exactly unpredictable, like it is stupid predictable, and the performances of these actors is questionable at best, but again, I thought it was a bit enduring and I did like it. So the first thing when I played Carbon all the way through was I noticed that the game feels a lot slower, and I just want to put that out there first. When it comes to the gameplay, this game does not have the same sense of speed that Most Wanted or Underground 2 has. You do go pretty fast, especially towards the end of the game, but it just never felt anywhere near as fast as those other games. And I'm not quite sure why that was, but it's just something I noticed pretty quick. But when it comes to the actual gameplay, it's very similar to Most Wanted, with a few expanded elements. You are dropped into a very open world that you can really explore to your heart's content, and there's missions all over. You can teleport to the missions, which is nice, you don't have to drive to any of them, and when it comes to the missions themselves, it's pretty much what you would expect from Need for Speed. There is, as you would expect, a ton of different races to do in this game. There's a ton of variants to the races, racing, lots of races, yeah. Sprints, checkpoints, knockouts, all the usuals are there. There's also drifting, which returns. The drifting is fine in this game. I didn't think anything crazy about it. It was fine enough. This game, though, is the first and only game in the Need for Speed series to really have that toge racing. I guess Tokyo Drift, the Fast and Furious movie, had just released, and so this game really was capitalizing on it, where you race in the mountains and you're going down the mountains at a crazy speed trying not to fly off. And yeah, that's really the game's main gimmick, is this toge racing, and you can race down the mountains against one person, a couple people at a time, and I actually thought these were a good change of pace, and the threat of actually being able to just drive off the side and lose the race immediately, I think it added to it. And then when you do the one-on-ones, I mean, this was fine enough. It wasn't anything amazing, and the rubber banding can really show up a lot worse here than the main racing, but it was fine. There wasn't anything crazy about it. I don't really get why this never came back either. I think it's a fine addition to the game. I think it actually can really change up the pace. At the very least, changes up the scenery, and there's plenty of straightaways here. Something about this map that I noticed is there's really not a lot of straightaways. Maybe that's one reason I didn't feel as fast. And then, of course, this wouldn't be, you know, a Most Wanted-like game without the police chases. The police chases return here. There doesn't really seem to be any police events. In fact, a lot of event types in general for Most Wanted are missing, but police chases are here, and, you know, I'll just be real. These are a huge step down for Most Wanted. They are lame as hell. The police never even give you a real challenge. They're never as aggressive or after you. They don't feel as intelligent. And I was generally pretty disappointed with the police chases here. It's not as bad as like Undercovers, but it wasn't great. Another big mechanic of Carbon is having these other drivers team up with you. You can kind of have a team, and some of them, you know, can look for shortcuts. Some of them can be aggressive. Some of them can just be fast. And I think this mechanic is woefully underdeveloped. It seems really bare bones, and I just never really got all that much out of it. I tried different teammates, I tried different combinations, but it just didn't really add much. In fact, it made the game even easier because my teammates somehow did way better than I did, way better than the AI. This game, it was a lot easier actually because of the teammates, and I don't think it was developed to do that. When it comes to the difficulty, this game is nowhere near as rubber bandy as the last couple games, but it's also not really challenging at all. And maybe it was due to this lack of challenge, but the game actually ends. It doesn't get super repetitive and go on and on and on. No, the game actually ends, and it's pretty short. It's like around the 5-hour mark, maybe 6, maybe like 7 to 100%. They're just, yeah, I was actually kind of surprised. It just ends. But hey, at least the customization is pretty good in this game. I think the controls, despite the lack of really great speed, I think the game still controls well, it feels well. The music, unfortunately, is pretty mid and pretty just sad compared to the last couple games. But looking back at Carbon, I think Carbon is pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty easy, it's not the longest, and you don't go the fastest, but I think it's a pretty solid entry in the series. It had some pretty big shoes to fill with Most Wanted, and no, it's not as good as that, but I think it's still a fun time, and I think if you like the series, it's definitely worth playing, especially if you like MW. It is totally worth playing. Alright, we're really getting into goated territory here. Here we have Need for Speed Underground 2 releasing in 2004. Now, Underground 2 really looks at the original and just says, how do we just improve this tenfold? And I think that they improved on Underground 1 tremendously. Now, this game attempts to have a story, so I'll go over it briefly. It takes place after Underground 1. You're the best street racer in that city. You get taken out by a jealous dude in an SUV, and you move to a new city and basically start over. That's it. The story's about as basic as it gets, not much to it. No, you are here for the gameplay. You are here for the racing. Now, Underground 2 drops that linear structure of the first game and drops you into an open world. This was the first Need for Speed game with a real open world to explore and just do tons of events in, and you've got tons of events here. And the first thing I'm going to say is there's no fast travel. You can't teleport to any of these events. You actually have to drive to them on the map. And you know, this might seem a bit old school, a bit archaic, and at first I was like, wow, really? But by the end of it, I actually really enjoyed it. I came to really know this city like the back of my hand, and I really liked it. I think this is one of the best open worlds in not only Need for Speed, but in racing games in general. It is just so well designed with so many intricacies, and yeah, it can look really confusing, especially by the freeways upon first glance, but as someone who lives in California, I mean, this isn't anything new for me. Our freeways are confusing as hell. But this open world feels so alive. It feels like there's so much to it with its nooks and crannies, and you know, when I started playing the game, I felt a little lost, I felt a little confused, but by the end of it, I totally knew my way around. Now, all the events from Underground 1 return, along with Street X or Street Cross or whatever it's supposed to be, which is basically a bunch of crazy sharp turns. Now, when it comes to the handling and the physics and how reliable the cars are, it is way better than Underground 1. Anything unpredictable from Underground 1 is gone. It feels a lot tighter, smoother. The cars, you have a lot more control over them. It's kind of funny as you go through this series how the physics got worse when they were so good here. Like, it's some of the best in the series when it comes to the handling and the physics and general driving and sense of speed. It's really well done here. Another new mechanic that this game has is it's similar to, say, Midnight Club, where you can just drive up to certain drivers, flash your lights, and go on a race. And I really like that freedom. It makes you a bit of extra cash. It's nothing essential, but it's fun. But what about what you're going to be racing in? Now, the car selection in Underground 2, it really is legendary. There's more than Underground 1, and I think the selection is actually really well done. And the customization, oh, it gets pretty crazy here also. Kind of like Underground 1, you got to add just a bunch of junk to your car, and I know, it's a bit of a flawed system, but I really do think the customization of this game is just as good as Underground 1, and I really like how really customizable it is. It's like, wow, you can put stuff on like every part of this car, not just like decals, but like parts. And yeah, it's got the star system and it's a bit silly, but whatever. This game adds SUVs, and I'll just be honest, I've never had any interest in SUVs, and I never use them. I really just couldn't care. But playing through Underground 2, it really opened my eyes and was like, wow, this is why so many people look fondly back on this game. It is an absolute blast to play through this game. And when it comes to the pacing, I think the pacing of Underground 2 is really good until the last chapter. There are 5 chapters in this game, and I think 1 through 4 are superb. You're getting new cars, you're going way faster, way quicker, you're doing a bunch of different events, and then when you hit chapter 5, this game becomes a bit of a repetitive slog. It becomes a real grind, actually. To get to this part of the game, you only had to do about 90 to 100 events, seriously. And then when you get to chapter 5, it's like, yeah, you need to do about 50, maybe 55, and it's like, wow, okay. I mean, at least thanks to this game has a pretty good length to it. It's well over 22 hours, which is pretty good for a racing game in the early to mid 2000s. I mean, that's a pretty long game. And yeah, it does get a bit repetitive, especially towards the end, but I still had a lot of fun with it, and the game absolutely still challenges you. Yes, the AI still cheat a bunch, there's a bunch of rubber banding, but it is nowhere, and I mean nowhere as bad as the first Underground. They don't cheat that much, it's not as ridiculous. The random traffic is still pretty annoying in this game, but it's not Underground 1. Like, I wasn't pulling my hair out in frustration. It never got that bad. But we're going to end on a positive for Underground 2 with the music. The music is fantastic in this game. It is a great mix of licensed music. Underground 1 had good music. This game, it's legendary. It is so good. I still listen to it nowadays. Honestly, it is just so good. And Underground 2 in general, there's a reason so many people looked on it so fondly. It's actually just a really good game still, and I absolutely recommend it, especially if you love arcade racers and if you love the time period. Like, it's a great game. It is a really fun time. And so here we have really the titan of the Need for Speed series. If you look up what most people's favorite Need for Speed game is, I think the most common answer you're going to find is this game, Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005. And it's probably my favorite Need for Speed game of all time also. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who groan and go, oh, another person who loves Most Wanted 2005 to death. And you know, I didn't play this growing up. I had never played this game before I made this video, and I really didn't know what to expect going into it. And by the time I was done with it, I was like, yeah, I could see why most people really love this game, because even all these years later, I think it's still unmatched. I don't think a Need for Speed game really has been better than this game. And in my mind, it is just unquestionably the best Need for Speed game released in the 2000s. And there's a couple of reasons why I think it's the best. Let's go over them. When it comes to the setup, I think it's actually really good. It's one of the best setups that the franchise has ever had, with the Blacklist, where you try to move up the ranks and just be the best racer to take out your arch rival who takes that really awesome looking car at the beginning of the game. Now, when it comes to the cutscenes and the acting and the performance and the story and the characters, yeah, it's corny as hell. It is cheesy as hell. It is high levels of cornball, but I love it. It is so endearing. It is so bad that it is good. It's great, honestly. At first I was like, what is this? I was like, this is just bad. But then as I watched it, I was like, oh no, this is bad. This is the good kind of bad though. This I love. It absolutely screams 2005, and I just love it for that. Now, when you're playing the game, when it comes to the game's handling, the sense of speed, the control, all of that stuff, oh, it's just fantastic. It is arguably the best in the series. It really is. It's one of the very best in the series, and you can't deny that. It's just so good. The cars handle really well, they turn really well, everything makes sense, it feels really nice, and this game has a fantastic sense of speed. One of the best games in the series when it comes to sense of speed. Now let's get down and dirty for a second. Let's talk about the cars. Let's talk about the selection. I'm no auto expert. I don't know everything about every car or every car brand or manufacturer, etc. I think the selection, though, is really good in Most Wanted 2005. I think there's a lot of variety here. I think there's a lot of great cars, and obviously the cover car is the best, but there's a lot of good cars here. I think the customization, while not as in-depth as, say, Underground 1 or 2, it's still really good. It doesn't get as crazy as those games, and the star thing is not as crazy either, but I still really did like the customization here. You can have a lot of really cool stuff. And then we have what you're racing on, the map. I think the map is actually expertly designed in Most Wanted. I think it's really well done, and it would honestly become a template for really like every Need for Speed game after this. Underground 2 obviously did set the foundation. This game I think really thrives with it though. It really does feel alive. There's a bunch to it, bunch of nook and crannies, bunch of shortcuts, bunch of different just paths, and you know, by the end of it, you're really going to know this map like the back of your hand, and it's just one of my favorite open world maps, period. And then when it comes to the setup and pacing of this game, I think it is a lot better paced than the Underground games, and I think the setup is still really well done. Like I said, you're trying to move up the blacklist. To do that, you're going to have to do a couple things. You're going to have to win some events, and you're going to have to be a bit risky when it comes to the law. Yes, the police return in this game. It had been a while since there were any police chases in a Need for Speed game, which I always thought was weird with all the illegal street racing, but they return here in full force, and it's just unparalleled. I think these are the best police chases in the entire series, like hands down, not even close. None of the other games have come close to this game when it comes to the police chases. Hot Pursuit 2, that's a really good one. Need for Speed Heat, that's also a really good one when it comes to the police chases. A little too aggressive in that one, but here they're just crazy aggressive, but it's the right kind of aggressive. They will do everything in their power to stop you. They are not complete dumbasses either. They will set traps, they will try to ram into you, they will try to corner you, and the attention to detail is really high when it comes to the police chases. There's a lot of dialogue that's been recorded for the police to know exactly where you are on the map. You can tell as the chase goes on longer and longer, they get more winded, they get more annoyed, they get more mad, and they really just try to take you out. And I just could not get enough of the police chases. Like, they are just so good in this game. They're absolutely relentless, and I loved it. I was like, wow, this game just gets it when it comes to the police chases, and I hope one day the police chases get as good as this game has them, because they're just so good, and it's one of the best aspects of this game. The police chases are just a spectacle. They are just so out to destroy you and end your life. It's great. But enough about the police. What about the events? You do a lot of events in this game, and there's a number of new ones here. Obviously, you got all your usual racing events, the checkpoints, the sprints, what you expect, really. But a new one you have is Toll Booth, which is basically like a time trial, but you got to go through these toll booths as fast as you can to get more time for your time trial. Another one that is new is Speed Trap, in which players compete in a competitive checkpoint race and must hit each checkpoint at their fastest speed. And then basically all the points add up. It's kind of like a race, but also it's all about how fast you're going at certain parts. I actually really like these. I think they change up the pace enough from the normal races to be something different and fun. Drag racing returns. It's a bit different from Underground 1 and 2. Underground 1 and 2s are very similar. This is, again, it's different. There's turns. It's much more of like an obstacle course you have to get through rather than an actual race, it seems. It's fine. I'd still say Underground 2 probably has the best drag races, but again, this is fine enough. It's still different and it's still fun. And I think everything really just comes together to make a fantastic racing game. But I'll be the first to admit this game does have some issues. It has aged in a few aspects. It does get a bit repetitive by the end. You do have to do some really crazy goals. You do a bunch of races and you need to go on this huge police chase that goes on for seriously like 15-20 minutes. Yeah, it does get a little old, but Despite that, it still absolutely held my interest, and the grind was nowhere near as bad as Underground 2's, and it's a lot more rewarding than Underground 2's in my opinion. I think the game is much better at rewarding you with new parts, new cars, etc. I also didn't think the AI cheated as much. The rubber banding was not as bad. The game was not as difficult when it came to the races as Underground 1 and 2. The real difficulty in the end is the police. Like, the police just get really difficult to deal with. And the traffic, it's finally not awful. It's just kind of annoying, but it's not anywhere near as bad as Undercover, Underground 2. No, it's not that bad. It's really a minor nuisance at worst. And if all of this wasn't enough, the game even has a challenge mode like the old games. I didn't really mess around with this though. And the last thing I want to mention is the soundtrack. It's my favorite Need for Speed soundtrack probably of all time, along with Most Wanted 2012. Something about Most Wanted soundtracks, they're just both really, really good. It has a perfect blend of 2000s music that I just really resonate with, I really like. I still got it on my phone nowadays. It's just fantastic. Like, the overall soundtrack, it just goes so hard. It fucks, it just absolutely gets laid. There's really nothing else to say about the soundtrack. It's just an excellent listen. And really, that's where I'm just kind of going to end things for Most Wanted 2005. You kind of already know how great this game is. I'm sure every Need for Speed fan is probably sick of hearing it at this point, how Most Wanted 2005 was the best game. Well, yeah, they kind of got me there. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the most exciting person choosing this game as their favorite or the top game, but you know, that's just kind of how I feel. After I played through it, I was like, yeah, I think this is the best one. I think it brings all the best elements of the Underground games with the Hot Pursuit games to create just a fantastic game, and I think it just hasn't really been beaten since, and I don't know if it will ever be beaten. To be honest, nostalgia has blinded so many people that for a lot of people it never will be beaten, but as someone with no nostalgia for this game, I think it's just an excellent game. It's absolutely worth playing. Play it in any way you can. It's just a great game. It's a fantastic racing game. It's one of my favorite racing games of all time, and of course, very recommended. That's it for this video. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you like this video, like, share, sub, all that good stuff. Share maybe with someone you know who likes Need for Speed. I'd really appreciate it. Apologies if my voice changed throughout the video. I got really sick as I was recording this, and yeah, I sound a little different, but you know, it is what it is. We love Need for Speed here. Nobody can deny at least the last couple games were great. And let me know your favorite down below. Anyway, I'll see everyone later. Bye.